Hey freshmen, this first video is for any blocks that didn't get through Roman numeral 2, A, B, C, and D. Fast forward as necessary. Otherwise, you can pick it up on Roman numeral 3 on the next video. This one's going to cover the powerful Jewish groups. We start off with the king, quote-unquote king. His name was Herod. The quotes suggest that he's not really a good king, or he's not a legitimate king, and that's how most people saw him. Here's a picture of Herod the Great, wearing it looks like a flower vase to me, but that's his crown. Herod was put into power by the Romans, and he was not seen as a legitimate king by the majority of people. In fact, he was only half Jewish, and so only a minority of people were able to really enjoy him as a king. They were known as Herodians. The people who supported Herod were known as Herodians. And very minority group. Herod eventually dies. He's the one that killed all the baby boys in Bethlehem. And he dies, and he divided up his kingdom into 4 different tetrarchies, as they were known, and put his children in charge, or at least the ones that he hadn't already killed. Because, he suspected some of them plotting against him. So, there are going to be multiple Herods. They're all children of Herod the Great, who's the king during Jesus' birth. He was a puppet king, so the Romans were the ones pulling the strings, so to speak. The Pharisees. It's a great picture of them taking a nap here. Jesus is calling them out, and they're just not even responding. The Pharisees were lawyer-esque religious leaders, so they studied the law, but since they were Jewish, they were studying the Mosaic law, right? And they taught the Mosaic law to others. They were known as rabbi, which means teacher. The word Pharisee just means, it comes from the word for pure, so they saw themselves as the pure ones who were especially diligent about following the Mosaic law. And they created all these extra elaborate rules so that no one would even come close to breaking one of the actual rules of the Mosaic law. Jesus kept criticizing them. That said, they were the group with the ideas most similar to Jesus, or at least the structure of his life. He was a rabbi himself. He lived kind of like a Pharisee in that he took on disciples and had them live with him. He taught in the synagogues. And so if you were just hearing about Jesus for the first time, you would probably categorize him as a Pharisee until you got closer and realized how much he criticized the Pharisees. And the main criticism that he had was that they performed their righteousness. Jesus had this very different idea of what makes someone righteous in God's eyes, and it's not about doing things in order to be seen. The Sadducees are the next group. The Sadducees are this elite group, priestly, so therefore they're connected to the temple. There's only one temple in the Gospels, and that's the temple in Jerusalem. So when Jesus gets to Jerusalem, he's going to encounter the Sadducees. They're this really unique group because they have very old school ideas about the law. In fact, they believe that only the books of the law, the Torah, were considered scripture. The prophets, the historical books, the wisdom literature, none of it was considered scripture for the Sadducees. That means any ideas in the Old Testament that you could find in the prophets, the wisdom literature, historical books, they didn't consider it to be scripture unless you could also find it in the Torah, right? So, for instance, resurrection. The prophets, the wisdom literature, they talk about how God will resurrect people at the last day. The Sadducees denied that because the word resurrection didn't appear in the Torah. And so they're going to confront Jesus about it. Like, how can you even say there's a resurrection? And that showdown is one of my all-time favorites. Jesus' response to them is so good. We'll get to that later in the Gospel of Matthew. Sadducees. The next one, the scribes and the chief priests, they are characters that will appear in all the Gospels, especially Matthew. The scribes are just Jewish government officials. They knew how to read and write, and so they were movers and shakers in society. The chief priests are the ones in Jerusalem that were in charge of the temple. They are going to really come into the story later when the conspiracy to kill Jesus takes off. So that's Roman numeral 2. I'll pick up this one in the next video.